Welcome back to Eschatology Matters on the Fight Laugh Feast Network. I'm your host, Josh Howard. You can find Eschatology Matters, as I said, on Fight Laugh Feast, so we're on the Pub TV app. You can find us on your podcast streaming platforms. YouTube is where most of our content is hosted, and we also can be found at eschatologymatters.org, so please check us out there. I'm joined today by Pastor Jared Kress from Kirby Woods Baptist Church in Memphis, Tennessee. But before we get to our topic today, I want to mention Boniface Media. Boniface Media is a streaming platform from Grace and Truth Press. Boniface is currently offering 50% off to 200 subscribers for the life of their subscription, unless that subscription is canceled or payment lapses on those subscriptions. So if you'd like to take advantage of that special offer, please head over to boniface.com. That's BONAFICE.com and enter the codes Alpha Test or Beta Test to apply that 50% discount. Boniface Media and at boniface.com. As I mentioned, I'm joined today by an old friend, Jared Kress. Jared, thank you so much for jumping on here with me today.
Glad to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Man, if I can just share just a very brief word of background, and then I'll let you kind of introduce where you're at and what you're up to. But I met Jared. We oftentimes, myself and Sean, will refer to this as like the most refreshing missionary talk ever. You came and visited our church. We were a supporting church. Usually you get a puff piece from missionaries that are visiting, and they'll tell you about, like, just how great it is. And you came in and, like, the kind of candor of your talk was like, man, things are tough sometimes and things are really hard. And it was just very, very honest. It was so encouraging. I'll just never forget that time of getting to know you a little bit. But Jared, tell everybody where you're at, what you're up to these days.
Currently the pastor of Kirby Woods Baptist Church in Memphis, Tennessee. And the road up to this point, I grew up in Lakeland, Florida, where most of my childhood, high school, college years were. And then when it came time for seminary, went to Mid-America Baptist in Memphis, which is across the street from the big Bellevue Baptist Church, and really enjoyed my seminary time there. And that was where I made a lot of friendships and ministry connections in Memphis. And during that time, I was an intern at Kirby Woods Baptist Church. So I started off as the coffee boy, the inflatable cleaner boy, all the things interns do. They say it's a pastoral ministries internship, but you know what that really means. Clean the inflatables. So it was a little bit of everything. And that was where I got to really know the congregation, served a lot in the youth and in the college. And then a couple years, 4 years after being there, was sent out as a church planter by Kirby Woods was the sending church. And so I was sort of the music guy plus whatever else was needed, preach on occasion, associate everything plus, and went to Fort Collins, Colorado. And we were there for about 4 years. So that was with Kirby Woods, but it was also through the North American Mission Board, partnering there as a church planter. And so we went there, we're there for about 4 years. And as that time sort of came to a conclusion, I was ready to become a senior pastor and went to San Antonio, Texas, where I was there at Calvary Hills Baptist Church for 3 years, and wasn't planning on leaving that church as soon as we did. But probably the one phone call that I was ready to take was from Kirby Woods, who called me back and asked if I'd be willing to come back and interview for the senior pastor of Kirby Woods. And so a long circle around the United States brought me back to Kirby Woods, where I'm now the pastor, and they've received me. We've had some growth. It's been a really unifying time. It's just been awesome. I've really enjoyed being back. And so that's where I am now, and going on my second, I'm in my second year, going on my third year of being back at Kirby Woods.
Are you out of the honeymoon phase yet, Jared?
Yeah, I'd say we're out of the honeymoon phase.
Good. That's always refreshing when, like, everybody doesn't love your sermons necessarily on any given Sunday.
Yeah,
honeymoon's over.
Yeah, the whole first year, it was just I wasn't the previous guy, and they were happy about that. And so, but now we've really settled in, and we just did a new vision statement, new values, new branding logo, all of that stuff. They're so excited about the future. They don't even want to talk about the past anymore, which is really exciting. A great time to be here.
Very cool. So this is actually a really good lead in. So we're here to talk, I mean, in the main part about your book. So Jared wrote a book called The 100-Year War. The subtitle is The Case for the Christian Home as a Primary Strategy which I find interesting. A primary strategy for spiritual renewal and revival. Which, if I can point out, Jared, you're in dangerous territory of being Puritan with that subtitle.
That was a tip of the cap, to William Carey and all the guys with the unnecessarily long titles.
That's right. Let me give you 14 paragraphs about what this book is going to be about. Yeah, no, that's good. But and you've got it displayed on the counter behind you as well. So the 100-Year War. I loved reading through this. I just thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm going to let you explain a little bit about the genesis of it, kind of how this came about, and what the main thrust is. I will say, since you gave me permission to, this is the least Baptist book I think I've read in a long time, and it's written by you, a Baptist pastor. It's not a Baptist book, right? And again, I'll let you kind of set the tone for that. But this was a super encouraging book, and it's a book with a long view. I found the setup to this, what you were saying just previously, really interesting, because you've come from a church planting background, right? You've been kind of involved with missional work at various levels. And then you've got this book right here where you're talking about the primary strategy for spiritual renewal and revival. You're not looking necessarily to the mission field. You're looking to the Christian home, at least first or primarily. So, Jared, walk us into this a little bit. How did this book come about, and what's sort of your big idea that you're communicating here?
So it began as a sermon series. I know I'm not going to, as a pastor, it's hard to be an author and a pastor. So the first place that I looked to was the series that I had done. And I really wasn't planning on doing this, but it was the encouragement of my own congregation of turning this series into a book. And they, prodding me and pushing me until finally I did it. And so it really began as you look around at the landscape of the world, and there's a lot of darkness, depression, a lot of hopelessness, I think. And people see the world kind of clearly collapsing around us. Things are getting worse and not looking like we want them to be, and so it's easy in that moment to change your mindset to just this like bunker mentality. Let's just hunker down and let's call it a day. And let's wait till Jesus comes back and takes all this home. And I saw that as kind of the routine way that Baptists were operating. And it bothered me because my first thought was, well, what if he doesn't come back for 500 years? Right. What does that do for my kids? What does that do for my grandkids? That kind of mentality and that thinking. So I don't necessarily just think it's right to assume Jesus is coming next year, so we should phone it in and kind of shut down. And maybe that's what you mean by not Baptist, because sadly that is the way a lot of Baptists think. I don't think you have to be a Baptist and think that way. So Hopefully I can sound the alarm on that for my brothers, and that we don't do that, please. And so it's one of those things of, okay, when things are crumbling around me, when I'm in extreme moments of stress, when I look at the country and I'm not happy with what I see, the best thing to do in life for me is to say, but what can I control? What are a few things that I can do? What are the old Jordan Peterson thing, clean your room before you worry about cleaning up Washington, right? There's a lot of truth in that. And so one thing Christians can control is our own home. We can control our family, especially fathers. We have an outsized influence in our house and in our family. But Christian parents can generally control the way their families operate. And if we all do this together, if there's this we're in this together mindset, and we all join together as the body of Christ and take on a similar mindset that we're in this for the long haul, then over time, I think we can see that change. But the problem that we're in didn't happen overnight. And so it's not going to get solved overnight. Everybody wants the quick fix. We want to snap our fingers and go back to 1950 or whatever the ideal year in our mind is. But it's probably going to take as much time as it took to do it. It's going to take that to undo it. In the back of my mind when I started this, I didn't reference it at all in the book, but I think it was it's called Gramsci's Long March Through Institutions. Mm-hmm. It's that concept of it's sort of a Marxist concept of you can change a society by infiltrating all the major sectors of that society, and over time it will change. And this is sort of saying, is there a Christian way to look at this? I think that answer is yes, but it's in our families, it's in our homes. As the home goes, the nation goes. It's a it's a trailing indicator, but it is true that eventually the nation will take on the flavor of the individual home unit. And that's why the fight is so raging so hot on that front today, because our enemies know it. I just don't know if we know it to the extent that they do.
Yep. Yeah. No, I you said several things that we're going to key in on, but like one of the things, like you were just mentioning, it's that home dynamic, which should be such a, I feel like that should be reflexive, just like a presupposition for Christians that of course we should be looking to our homes, but oftentimes we lose that. One of the things I found refreshing, we did I'm trying to remember the title. It was a series on essentially culture building within Christendom. It was like a little 6-7 part interview series. But a lot of the stuff we were talking about, you're talking about like cultural revival or retrieval. You're talking about how to influence a nation or a people. You know, like widespread, big picture type stuff. And then when you get around to the like how to do that, it's usually like, Dad, you need to like pray at the table with your kids, and you probably need to read the Bible. You know, it's very simple things. We've lost sight of that. It feels like within so many, you know, I joked about the whole Baptist thing at the beginning, but like this is across, I think, Christianity. We've lost sight of that.
Yeah. We don't really like the simple answers because it's that mindset of we want to go straight to the top. We want to, it's sort of like, I bet you everybody knows who they're voting for in the fall. You should know, right? At this point, either you got Trump, you got RFK, you got Biden, or you can write in whoever you want.
That's assuming those stay on the ballot, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, who knows now? I know I should say we just had that debate. But like, I would imagine how many fewer people know about their mayor, how many fewer people know about their city council, and that reflects the mindset of the average Christian in that we want the quick fix. We assume everything can be done from Washington. That's a political thing, but if we look at our everything else, we want how many times do Christians think if Justin Bieber would just share the gospel on the stage at the Grammys, then we would see revival. And it's like, right. That's the same thing as just caring about Washington. Like, what's going on in our lives daily is much more going to affect what happens nationwide. So we have this a reticence to the actual answers because usually they mean work. You know, that daily grind is where the work is at. And we'd much rather take Ozempic than get on the treadmill, right? I mean, that's how we are. That's how we are. And it's the truth of our spiritual lives as well.
And that plays into, not to just like force this into an eschatology discussion, but like I feel like that impacts it, right? If our eschatology, no matter your millennial presuppositions or convictions, if our eschatology is one that pretty much ends at the end of our lifetime, which I think is what a lot of American Christians have fallen into. You talk about this in the book, right? We're looking at our lifetime, and that's why there's such a heavy focus on our retirement years and all these things versus, as you've said, like you should be thinking about your grandkids and great grandkids. That is such a paradigm shift for so many Christians, I think, that haven't been thinking that way.
Yeah, I mean, and I know that that's not how Baptists used to think because we've built such an incredible institution that we have, just to say, I am Southern Baptist. We've got our problems, but like if you look at, we have an incredible foreign mission sending agency and International Mission Board. I know NAM is under scrutiny for some of their transparency things, but it's still impressive, especially with the send relief that we do, the Compassion and Mercy Ministries. All the state associations that we have, the local associations, not to mention 6 seminaries that I heard someone say educate like a third of the seminary students in America. So we know how to build institutions and we know how to think long term, but something has happened in recent years, and it may be eschatology. It may be the fruits of dispensationalism that have gotten in there to a point where we think, I need to just hunker down and wait for Jesus to come back. But again, what does that do for my kids and my grandkids? That's what I'm left thinking. I have little kids in the home right now, and I think about what they're going to get left, what I'm leaving to them. And I think we should, if we all thought like that, don't, even in just retirement, don't think about how much money can I spend on the beach before I die? How much money can I give to my kids so that they can set themselves up for the future? that's a spiritual thought. It's more than just a material money thought. It's a spiritual thought that you're thinking ahead, you're looking to the future. And that's why I picked the number 100. The 100-year war was because 100 is that number that's right outside your control. You know, you will likely meet your grandchildren one day. You will likely, maybe, if we all, have kids early and you live long, meet your great grandchildren, and then you'll die when they're little kids.
Mhm.
You will not meet your great great grandchildren. So that's 100 years out. And so it's that let's force ourselves to think one generation beyond our death and live for that.
Mm.
And that's why I kind of concluded the book with that old proverb that I don't even know where it's from, but you learn the meaning of life when you plant trees, knowing you'll never sit in their shade. When you think like that, it changes your entire life, and I think that's what we have to do.
Yeah, no, it does change your, I mean, my thinking has been honed in this, and it does change the way you look at things. I think, when you think about the eschatology, because I know, number one, we don't want to be unfair, or I don't want to be unfair with what I'm about to say. But like, I think that an unstudied premillennial dispensationalism does fuel a lot of people's fire, right? So like some people have that kind of and I say unstudied because a lot of times it's kind of, we've garnered this conception from, media or from books or whatever, and we kind of have this idea. I think it's less that. I think it's a lot of times more that a lot of American Christians have an immediacy. Their eschatology is immediacy, or imminency, rather. I'm sorry, not immediacy. It's an imminency. It's we fully are expecting for Christ to return during our lifetime. We are fully, and we're preparing accordingly, right? Like, I don't mean in a good way. We're preparing in the way you just said, like, as if everything's going to run out and the house is going to fall down. We're also refusing to plan generations down the road. Everything is imminentized to the point where there is no generational view. And that's one of the things that I find, and this is why when people see election cycles, like, why are American Christians so prone to blackpilling every time 4 years rolls around? We have another, I mean, it's going to be a rocky year. I have no doubts. It's going to be a lot of things that you could get blackpilled on. But this is not the end of the road, any more so than many other times within Christian history. But I think it's that imminency that we've really adopted wholesale that a lot of Christians are falling prey to.
I think this message of this book really is is for Gen Z, because if you think about what they've lived under constant fear mongering and from everybody.
Yeah.
The number one part that I see is if you're let's say if you're 18 or 21 years old today, your entire life that you've been able to understand the news, people have been saying that the sea levels are going to rise and the polar ice caps are going to melt, and your skin's going to burn off as the sun comes into the ozone layer. And, like, it's changed from global warming to cooling to climate change and all these things. And it's an extreme fear that's been placed on your life. And Greta Thunberg somewhere yells, how dare you? You stole my childhood. And that is how the average 18-year-old has remembered their childhood.
Right.
Is not the actual fear of climate change, but the fear of it. Like,
right.
That's constant. And so I think it's perfect right now for Christians to come in with a little bit of hope and to say, hey, you know what? Those people are actually crazy. Here's the gospel that we have hope in this life and in the next.
Mm-hmm.
And that should be, I think it's going to be received as like a deep breath to somebody who's lived under that kind of fear.
Absolutely. So you have this thing, and I think I stole it in my sermon, like I was telling you before we started recording. I think I stole it in my sermon on this previous Sunday, without attribution, by the way, which is how you should preach.
Now you're Southern Baptist. There you go.
Yeah. No. Anyway, so it was a statistic, and you kind of it's funny when you're saying these things, you have to couch it, you have to qualify it. You did that, right? Like, you're like, this is not what I'm saying, but this is what I'm saying with it. But it was a statistic about where we are seeing growth in the Christian church. And you pointed out, and I'm going to mess the numbers up if I give them, but it was essentially a pretty big gain through household. Well, I'll let you walk into it, but essentially through births to Christian families, we're seeing a large influx of Christians, children raised born and raised in Christian homes who come to faith and stay in the faith, as opposed to our evangelistic efforts are seeing a net negative, at least during that little, I think it was a 5-year study or something like that. Walk us into
Right.
that a little bit, though, Jared, because I found that part just fascinating.
Yeah, when I was prepping for this, I went through all the Pew research polls, the Gallup polls, and I found one that just shocked me when I was comparing conversion rates through evangelism to birth rates. And so basically, this is don't worry about the individual numbers. Here's what you need to know. Christians do a pretty good job at birthing babies compared to non-religious people. Okay. So Muslims are doing good, Mormons are doing good, Christians are doing good at birth, just at birthing people. Okay.
Right.
And I don't mean birthing people as what the left says. I mean,
Called a mother, Jared. Get it right.
That's right. So we're doing pretty good at actually having babies, not compared to ourselves in the past, but compared to others now.
Right.
All right. So at the same time, we are doing very poorly at evangelism, meaning that we are losing Christians through deconversion, okay, and at a pretty significant gross. So year by year, we lose more than we gain through evangelism, but we gain more than we lose through birth.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what it comes down to. And my takeaway from that, I don't know what the takeaway should be necessarily, but my takeaway was, I know that I'm in a Baptist context, and I'll just speak for us, put a lot of emphasis on missions. And I think that's great. We know how to strategize missions. We know how to go into a place and learn the culture and learn the language. And we know the percentage of the unreached people groups. And we have cover jobs where we send missionaries in, and they have, they say they're this job, but really they're doing evangelism. And we have these platforms that are incredible stuff that the government, would learn from. At the same time, the Lifeway stat stares you in the face every year, and it doesn't change because it's the same stat from when I was a kid, that 70% of our own children leave the faith by the time they're done with college. So what that tells me is we put all this effort into missions that we're failing at statistically, and family ministry, children's ministry, support of parents, education within church, that's getting just the little leftovers of our ministry efforts. And yet it's the way we're the most successful at the Great Commission.
Yep.
So I just saying we need to think about how willing we are to be strategic about ministry to families and children as opposed to missions. Not that we can't do both.
Right.
We're all smart people. We can do two things at one time, but we put all the effort into missions and give the leftovers a lot of times to the kids and the families, when the stats are showing us, if I could be a little pragmatist here, the stats are showing us that's where we're winning.
Yeah.
Because atheists don't have babies like we do. They just don't. Think of the average, blue city liberal atheist, and they're probably in their late 30s with 2 degrees, and if they have children, they have one, and that child is like the apple of their eye, and it's the one that they've had, and that's the average. Whereas many Christian families have 3, 4, 5. We have 2 in our church with 7.
Mm-hmm.
So, by numbers, if you give us enough time, we got you. But and it's not just about birth battles. I know that, but if it was, we'd win, right?
Right.
But if it was about birth battles, Christians would win that. And I'm not saying that it should be, but I'm just saying we got to look at where we're succeeding, look at where we're failing. And another spot where we're failing is that once we birth them, we don't do a good job of keeping them in the faith. So
right.
that's sort of the later chapters of, beware the hidden cost chapter was, why is that happening?
Yep. Yeah, no. And I'm just going to dispense with all the qualifiers. You do that in the book, which is needed, right? Like you have to put the qualifiers in. We don't need qualifiers to say like, it is good for you to have a lot of kids. That doesn't mean everybody has to have all the kids. Like all the qualifiers out there, it's just good for Christians to have kids. If God is pleased to send them to you and you're able to, this is good. They're actually called a blessing in Scripture. Have a bunch of kids. That's a good thing. And then once you have them, to raise them, it's interesting because you pointed out the whole interplay with evangelism. Number one, yes and amen that we can do both, right? It's so funny that the second you start to talk about family ministry, it's like you have to throw in the qualifier of yes, you should still share the gospel through evangelism. That again, that should just be an obvious one,
Right.
right? Like we don't have to do that qualification. Well, we shouldn't have to, but we do. But with that whole dynamic, the 10% to missions has been kind of a standard in a lot of churches for a long time. I can think of many even sermons that focus a lot on evangelism and foreign missions specifically, like the missional efforts of the church. I can think of very few that really built up that family dynamic. And you're looking around in the church, and there's a lot of little souls that are stacked in that congregation, which God says is a blessing. So that was
Right.
one of the reasons I just found that point so compelling and encouraging.
Yeah, we have to look at what God's given us right in front of our face sometimes. That's the secret of that whole stat was this is where we're actually succeeding at. And if we took just a little bit of the strategy that we're so accustomed to using on missions, if we put that towards our own kids, we would have this world turned around fast. And so that's the 100-year war in essence, is to say if we did this, it looks like we would have some incredible results if we just stop losing our kids to the enemy. If
Yeah.
we kept our marriages together, and if we stopped losing our kids to the tune of 70%, we would probably see some incredible gains.
Yeah. Yeah. They had somebody had posted a tweet the other day, and I cannot remember who that was off the top of my head, but it was talking about, I think he was keying in on Presbyterians and Baptists in particular. But kind of his musing on this was that he said Presbyterians, but I think you could lump in a lot of Reformed churches have typically done a pretty good job of focusing on the family. And a lot of that comes from covenant theology and other things. But there's a heavy focus on the family, on the children of believers, on things like catechism and training, those sort of things. So you see a lot of cohesiveness there. Now, on the flip side, he said a lot of the Baptists, and I think you could probably include a lot of kind of low church ecclesiology churches, very good at evangelism to the point they shame others, right? Foreign missions, like they've got it nailed, a little less so with the families. His point was that in our day and age, when you look around, it's 2024, and you look at, as you pointed out, Jared, what the just being honest of what the challenges are to evangelism in this day and age. What do the fields look like? Are they ripe unto the harvest in these areas? And then looking to our own families, his point was for that across the church, no matter your covenant theology standing, that we do well to look at those families and really equip our people to raise their children well. I found that really kind of in keeping with what you're pointing out here.
Yeah, and that's why I've always thought Baptists and Presbyterians need each other. We kind of we kind of are there's a lot that overlaps in that Venn diagram, but there's some things that we can learn from each other. And I always have over the years tried to be broad in my reading and who I listen to, because it is important to focus on our families, but it also is important that there are people who will never hear the gospel in India in their entire life,
Mm.
and I feel compassion for them that they should have an opportunity to hear the gospel. So like both things are absolutely true, and I think we can do both. I'm seeing a trend in Baptist churches that is going this direction of wanting to kind of right that side of the ship where
Yep.
where we're losing, the hole in the bucket, that 70% stat. And I've told our church on several occasions and others, if we can't stop this stat, we ought to just shut the doors and go home, guys. If we can't figure out why we're losing 70%. I mean, I heard Ben Merkel say one day on a podcast that that's worse than D-Day. I mean, that's a
Man.
worse percentage of survival than what they had on the beaches of Normandy.
Wow.
And yet, you would think if you saw something like that, there'd be the flashing lights and let's pull the fire alarm and let's go nuts or something, because that's the whole reason we exist, is the salvation of our kids. And so if we're failing to the tune of 70%, we got to stop doing what we've been doing. Clearly, like something's not right. That's not as much as the culture. That's something within me, in my home. So we have to figure that out, and that's super important.
Absolutely. No, that's super good. Yeah, the D-Day. Wow. So the book's not that, I mean, how long has this been out? Like a month or two, maybe?
Yeah, probably 1 or 2 months.
Okay. So I know you're starting to reflect back on it. If you're like most writers, it seems like, the second you submit the final manuscript, then you got all sorts of things you wish you would have put in.
Oh, of course.
What was on either the cutting room floor or something you would put in for a second edition? What would you build on from this book? What's out there that you're also thinking through on that topic?
I would absolutely add a practical guide to a family worship gathering in the home.
Ooh,
That would
good.
be the number one thing I would say is just, I'd put a little picture of that cartoon and the guy from the 50s that says, "So you want to do this, huh?" And then I would say, here's just what a typical gathering it could look like in your home if you wanted to jumpstart some things. And I would probably even ask my wife to do some things because she'd write some stuff. She could write some things that happen when I'm not home because she's at home during the day with the kids more than I am. And so she does a lot at the breakfast table after I've gone to work with the kids. And I would say, "Hey, what are you doing?" Because I woke up a few mornings ago and I heard my son was singing Victory in Jesus in his room before I woke him up. And my daughter was singing Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. And I
Oh
was like,
man.
and I did not teach them so I knew my wife was doing it. So I went in and I was just like, this is awesome, that because I knew she was doing that while I was away at work. And so that part of it, of what's accomplished, what can be accomplished by a godly wife laboring at home while the husband's at work. I would probably include that. And then I would include a template for just what does a run of the mill daily pouring into your kids look like?
Yeah, no, that would be really good. Maybe you could even find a way to do that in article form or something because we hear that question. I pastor as well, and we hear that question quite frequently. And a lot of times it's from Christians that this just was not on the radar, 15 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, variety of reasons probably, but at the same time, they're looking at their 12, 15-year-olds and they're thinking, how do I start this now? And our encouragement's usually been pretty simple, like literally sit down and sing a hymn and read a passage of scripture. Like it doesn't have to be anything super crazy or fancy, but like you doing it is super important and meaningful.
Yeah. Just seeing something. I mean, I've even thought about the fact that I do 99% of my Bible reading in my office here where I am at church. And I've even had this thought in my head of I would like my kids to see me doing this. So I may just out of pure optics, pure visuals, open my Bible at home just so they can say they saw dad read their Bible at
Yeah.
home. Because I know that's the case. It's just that they can participate and see. It sticks with them. As they say, some things are caught more than they're taught. And
Yeah.
I think that may be one of those things.
Yeah. So this risks going down a rabbit trail, but like what you just said, it's the I think a lot of us tend toward thinking that faith is grounded in propositional truths that can be articulated, specifically with our kids, right? That like if my kids know the answers to the catechism questions, if they can answer me about what's in scripture, all that's important, right? That's good. But we've lost sight of the aesthetic, that kind of lived experience of
Yeah,
Christianity, hearing dad sing, watching mom pray. It's just that lived,
100%.
yeah, the warp and woof of their Christian experience.
Here's how I know that's true is when I had kids, I started doing things that I never once was taught to do. I started saying things that I heard my dad say, and I started repeating things that my mom did for me when I was a kid. Never once did they sit me down and say, "Now, son, one day you're going to have children, and when you do, here's what you do. When they say this, you do this, and here's when you spank, and here's when you don't spank." And here, I just started doing what they did. It was like it was pre-programmed, but it wasn't because I saw it in them. And I think that happens not just in discipline, but it happens in the way we live our Christian life. You
Absolutely.
naturally repeat what you saw your parents do for better or for worse. And so I think we have to carry that with us into our homes.
Absolutely. No, Jared, this is encouraging. I hope this catches on. And like you said, I'm encouraged by I remember us doing we were introducing catechisms. This is a decade ago. And I remember for a lot of people that raised all sorts of red flags and they were like, you guys are Roman Catholic, what's happening? And there's
Just
still a
call
lot of
them
people.
just call them FAQs, frequently asked questions.
That's what we did. We rebranded it and just said they're question and answer guides.
Yeah,
And
that's
everybody's like,
it.
oh, this is great.
Oh, great. Well, then that's of course.
Yeah. But I mean, now you see, I've seen several guys. Well, Ref Tunes did a kind of rebranding of the I think it was Keach's Catechism. I've seen some guys coming out with kind of 3 volume sets of the anyway, you're seeing a lot of retrieval of these
Oh yeah,
very old, very, very good ways of just training our kids and a focus on that. So I hope it is catching on.
I think
Um,
so.
yeah, I think it will, and that's one of those great blessings I think of trying times, which we're not in the worst day that's ever lived, but we're in a trying time in America, and when those times
Sure.
come, it can encourage the church. So let me plug it again though. The 100 Year War. Grab a copy on Amazon.
Yeah,
Teach
that's
your
right.
children and leave lots of 1-star reviews so Jared can pump up. No, leave a good review, right?
Hey, whatever helps the algorithm. If it's anger, that's what you have to do.
I can confidently say I have no idea what tilts the algorithm these days, but we'll hope it does. But Jared, thank you
Yeah.
so much, brother. This was encouraging, and yeah, I'm grateful for your work.
Anytime. Thanks for the invitation. Glad to be familiar with your channel, and anything I can do to help you, let me know.
Absolutely. Thanks, brother.
Yes, sir.
Seated here at my right hand,